Cool. Okay. So, what questions shall I ask?
That is a great question.
Hello and welcome to episode 15 of The Cutting Room. I'm Paul Sherwood, one of the founders here at 7 Videos. This week's episode is all about how to build a brand in just 8 weeks. For those that caught the last episode, we had Claire on talking about all things to do with your marketing plan and how to use video effectively within them. If you haven't listened or watched that yet, I would thoroughly recommend that you do so. There were some really good insights in there. And we've got the guests coming thick and fast, as in this week's episode, as I mentioned, was all about building a brand in just 8 weeks. And we've got the perfect guest for this. So I'm delighted to introduce Mr. James Blackburn, who is the VP of Product Marketing at Cyberight. James, welcome. How are we doing?
Doing great. Thank you very much, Paul. And really looking forward to being on the podcast today.
Brilliant. And thanks for giving up your time and your very busy schedule to be here with us. So, James, we've obviously worked together for a number of years now, but for our viewers and listeners out there who aren't familiar with yourself or Cyberight or your journey, can you just tell us a little bit about your current role as VP of Product Marketing, what that entails, and also your journey to getting there?
Yeah, so as VP of Product Marketing, it's my role really to take a lead on a number of key product-related initiatives, such as our pricing strategy and model, our product positioning and messaging, and effectively how we go to market and execute on our wider go-to-market strategy.
Brilliant. No, that sounds really good. And I think what I'd like to understand a little bit more is how did it all start with you in marketing? Like, how long have you been in marketing? What's your journey been like? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, it started a very long time ago, I guess, somewhat subconsciously, in my very early years, actually being a DJ and maybe somewhat subconsciously inheriting a lot of those skills through social events and PR. Ended up going to uni and doing marketing there and really found my passion and fell in love with it there. From there on, started as a marketing intern at the uni, was great, which was great experience and was really grateful for that opportunity, and ended up getting into the tech sector, starting up as a marketing executive and working my way through the ranks as a marketing manager, then head of, and ultimately now in the position where I'm at now as VP of Product Marketing for Cyberight.
Nice, brilliant. No, that sounds like a good journey and in a relatively short space of time to be in the role that you're at now. So no, that's fantastic. And
somewhat, but I blinked.
Yeah, I know. I can relate to that, mate, for sure.
Yeah.
So before we get into how to build a brand and what that means and your experiences kind of in doing that, one thing I just wanted to sort of touch on is like, what are we meaning by brand, and what does brand, what is a brand, and what does brand mean to you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, in literal terms, it's a logo and a name, a color palette, a domain, but it's far deeper than that, I think. A brand is an organization's personality, and it really kind of dictates the content, the tone of voice throughout the whole user experience, which broadly impacts organizations' entire strategy and customer experience, whether it's online or offline, and can ultimately quite have a substantial impact on how our company goes to market, how they price themselves, how they position themselves, and ultimately how they sell.
Yeah, and it's how you make people feel, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I work in marketing, so for me, I really like brands. So I think I'm really happy to be here today talking about brands, and I actually make some of my purchasing decisions based on branding. More somewhat on the look and feel, but as I said, it's kind of broader than that. When executed effectively, it can really impact the entire user journey through discovery through to sale. So I think it's very, very important. It's a really prevalent topic, and it's something marketing teams should be really focused on and take a lot of pride in as well.
Yeah, no, that sounds really good. So if we can just talk about some of the brands out there and what they're doing to, say, differentiate themselves, whether it's from a pricing perspective or how they're making clients feel. Like, could you just elaborate a little bit on that and which what companies are coming up against each other?
Yeah, no, really. So the brand, I guess, really is focused centrally around the audience that you intend to target and the markets you would like to operate in. And you can see some really distinct examples from how companies position themselves and how they price themselves. You look comparatively at how a Tesco Extra would package their products and how they would price their products and the audience they perhaps intend to market to versus a Marks and Spencer, or a Vauxhall versus a Rolls Royce, or Casio versus Rolex. I would say that the quality and the detail of the messaging is obviously very different, and you can imagine what the user experience would be like purchasing either of those brands, and how it would be different from an end-to-end perspective. So it plays a really, really large part in any organization's overall go-to-market strategy.
No, definitely. And I think, we've worked in the past with certain food manufacturers that we know that they make the same foods for some of the big brands and some of the more lower perceived value brands. And it's very, very similar other than the branding that's kind of differentiating them. And that is how, people feel about particular brands, isn't it?
Yeah. It's really interesting. I can't remember the organization that did it, but I saw it on social media. I'm not sure if you guys did, but there was a social experiment that took place recently where companies effectively made up a brand and positioned themselves as a super high-end product, and it was effectively much lower end products that they were selling, but because they advertised and they dressed the shop up in a certain way, and they put on a particular customer experience, people went in and were paying sort of 200-300% markups for these products. It was a retail example. I can't remember what it was called. Maybe we'll take a look at it afterwards. But they were putting 200-300% markup on the products, and people were buying for it under the illusion of this luxury experience through the power of positioning.
Yeah, and it's funny that, and it's like perception is reality, isn't it? Really, and that's one thing we talk about is whatever your audience's perception is the reality. If they think your product's worth $5,000, $10,000, $200,000, that's the reality of it. So, and branding and your brand, I guess, helps to change and adapt those perceptions to what you want them to be.
Yeah, and it depends on which market you operate on, and you've got the graph, haven't you, where it's like quality and price, and companies will need to brand themselves and position themselves and have various different marketing initiatives and strategies as to where you fall within that quadrant. Whether you fall in the upper right hand corner where you're the most expensive and you have the highest quality service or product, you'll need to have a very, very distinct and very different customer experience and have a very different look and feel about the brand, as to if you were, in the bottom left-hand corner of the quadrant of price and quality. So,
yeah, no, definitely. And I think that kind of leads us nicely on to like how you sort of form the brand, and we're wanting to get into how to build a brand in areas, but I wanted to sort of just touch on a little bit on your experience before we get into the strategy and tactics side, because we know you've been through a fair few rebrands, particularly in the last few years. So if you just tell us a little bit about your experience with rebrands over the last few years and what they've looked like.
Yeah, no, there has been, and I've been really privileged to be a part of them. Worked with you guys on quite a few of those projects. I think five rebrands I've maybe done in the last 3 years, which is quite a lot. And in context, for that's I guess been throughout a number of different reasons, really, through mergers and acquisitions and slight pivots in strategy. But fundamentally, I think when it comes to why a company might rebrand, there can be various different reasons which may influence that, such as their overall strategy. Has the market changed? Has the audience's preferences changed? Do they need to reposition themselves? Do they need to modernize their brand to appeal to a slightly new audience? Or is the business just completely changing direction? In one of the recent examples and one of the recent projects I've worked on, that was really the case. It was in a startup-esque organization, so there wasn't kind of too much market impact beforehand anyway, because we weren't actively trading, but we're building a product, and we decided to shift focus and focus more on the cybersecurity market, particularly around zero trust. And we had this unique opportunity to reframe ourselves, reposition ourselves, rebrand ourselves, I guess to appeal more to that specific market, which was where our focus was going in terms of product development. So that was what we went ahead and did. But yeah, it's been a very busy few years, to say the least.
So I guess another question from me is when you're doing so many rebrands in such a short space of time than what is traditionally common, like how do you find the energy, the creativity, the innovation to keep delivering that regularly?
Yeah, it's a great question. Energy there hasn't always been an option sometimes, because there's been a deadline that you gotta meet, so you just got to get it done. Not every rebrand has been the same. There's been instances where we've been given a brand and a set of guidelines and had to execute on it. Other times there hasn't been a brand and it's been a completely blank canvas, which has been a great experience, creating something from scratch and being able to kind of see that end to end and see the brand come to life. As you create the logo, you create the brand guidelines, you start to work on the website and video projects. But there's a number of different ways to go about it, and I think it's like anything. Experience really pays dividends, and the more you do something, the more efficient ways you find to do it, and you learn from mistakes from kind of past projects and past experiences. And I would most certainly say it's gotten easier as time's gone on, but rebranding these days isn't as easy as it used to be, let's say 5, 10, 15 years ago, through a number of different considerations. If you look at social media handles, domain names, there's a lot less choice available these days when you go to work on a rebrand project. And I think a key thing to kind of really try and establish from the outset when you've got an idea and you've got something that you think is a bit of a goer is trying to find that clear line of sight. Have you got a domain name that you can make work? Have you got a number of social media handles that you can make work? Have you done your due diligence? Have you checked, the trademark registries? Have you checked on Companies House to make sure there aren't any kind of brand conflictions there? And if you've got a pretty good clear line of sight, then execute on it and go for it. And yeah, it's been some really great experience.
No, it sounds it, and a bit of a whirlwind few years by the sounds of it, but keeps you on your toes.
Yeah.
So I think to get into sort of the bulk of what we're wanting to cover today, it's all around how to build a brand in 8 weeks, and you've potentially even done that in shorter time frames, but we can get onto that. So I guess if that is your task, like what should people listening to this or watching this, what should they be doing, and how the hell do you go about doing that in such a short space of time?
Firstly, don't panic. And then secondly, like anything, coming up with a plan. I think when it comes to planning, there are kind of 3 key elements that you really need to consider when you go about this within your initial plan, which would be, what are you trying to achieve from an objective standpoint? What could be the potential challenges or perceived considerations of going through a rebrand from a maybe legal perspective, from an operational perspective, from a systems perspective, even down to your people and staff. One of the things that I've learned a lot throughout this process is just how emotionally invested staff can be in brands. And like anything, not everybody is great with dealing with change. So when you go through a rebrand, it can be quite a substantial change. And
how do you deal with that as a marketer? Like, how do you help to facilitate that change and without there being any sort of conflict within the business?
Well, communication is essential, and particularly within your leadership teams and within your management teams, you've really got to make sure that everybody's aligned and singing from the same hymn sheet and bought into the prospect, and that will then kind of trickle down into the other areas of the business. But communication and keeping people informed and being transparent, I think, is a really, really fundamental aspect to the success of that. And another thing that you can look at when you come to your planning with this is, what your market opportunities are as well. This is a complete blank canvas to completely reposition yourself, reinvent yourself as an organization. Do you want to reframe the business in a different way? Do you want to step it up from perhaps a quality perspective? 10 years ago when you first started out, did you maybe just compete on price? And are you in a more credible and established place now where you're actually charging more because you're able to deliver a higher quality of service? So do you then want to look at actually reframing the brand to a more higher quality brand than perhaps something that wasn't quite as much of a focus beforehand? And I know on some of the projects that I've worked on, that's kind of been the case, and we talked about it internally as kind of like a maturity exercise. We're kind of growing up, and it was the next chapter and the next phase of growth for the business, and we needed a brand that was suitable for order for us to do so, and that would really stand the test of time.
And how do you find that as as a marketing function? It's key to any sort of rebranding exercise, but I guess the decision to go through a rebranding process isn't always made. It's maybe made at sort of board level. And how do you find that process with working with the board to sort of deliver on rebrands?
Yeah, exciting, and particularly when they're as excited to being engaged in the projects. And I think we were talking about before, it can kind of come through a number of different reasons as to why a company might want to approach a rebrand. It could be through mergers and acquisitions. It could be through a complete pivot in terms of strategy and product focus, or even the market that they want to go after. Particularly at a global level, if you decide you want to operate in a different market geographically, there could be some serious considerations as to how you need to position yourself and how you need to frame yourself within certain audiences. So yeah, it's good. I mean, obviously working with a board, like anything, you're going to have some strong personalities, and you've got to kind of really be courageous and keep things moving forward. And with a brand, it's really difficult because it's not objective. It's a very subjective exercise. Everybody's going to have different opinions. And I think what's really important through a rebranding exercise, particularly working with a leadership team, is trying to capture a broad scope of feedback across fundamental areas of the business, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, whether it's customer service, whether it's the technical, areas of the business. They're all going to have different perspectives, and your job in the marketing team, or as a marketing manager or a head of marketing, is to capture all of that and try and pull it all together into one concise answer.
Sounds a lot to do.
Yeah.
I think, and there's a lot of internal politics at play within sort of larger organizations, making sure that everybody's happy with the direction it's going. As you say, it's very subjective. You could have two twins who think very, very similarly, who might like one thing and dislike the other. It's so subjective. So that must be quite difficult to manage. And I guess I get the planning side of things and the communication being key. I think just in terms of the time frame, then I guess you obviously have to be really strict with your deadlines, and like how much of a factor are they? Is it a case of, well, this needs to be done at this particular, like, because we did a rebrand a couple of years ago, and we on the day that we were launching it, I wouldn't do it again because it was a very, very stressful time. But we did a live stream, and we did the rebrand live to a similar sort of setup to this, and the new website had to go live at the same point that the live stream was going out, and it was hard work.
I remember you executed it really well, and you sent out a direct mail campaign to a bunch of your customers, me at the time being one of them, with, I think it had a QR code in there at the time to a surprise. And then when you opened up the QR code, it was a countdown to a rebrand and an invitation to join the live stream link. So I thought that was really creative, and I thought you did a fantastic job with it.
Yeah, it was good. It's good to hear. And I think, kind of got lost in my own sort of stresses of reliving those moments that I kind of lost myself in the question. But I think from me understanding, I guess the strains that can be in place when you're going through something quite stressful like that. Like, what made it easier for us is it had to be done by that date, because we've sent all the stuff out. Everyone's expecting us. Like, we need to turn up, and it needs to be ready. Like, how important is that in doing it in such a short space of time? Is having that definitive end point that it has to be ready here.
I think it's really important. You know what they say, pressure makes diamonds. And I think it's really important to have a firm deadline. Otherwise, you can end up debating trivial aspects, perhaps for longer than you really need to. And realistically, it will really help you in making critical decisions and just moving things forward much faster. Obviously, with any project, you need a project plan, and you need definitive timelines, and you need to kind of outline the steps that need to take place within a particular order in able to be able to complete the project, which, if you can't do that in-house and you don't perhaps have the experience in-house to do that, most certainly consult a credible agency, and they will help you in pulling together a project plan like that. But I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? We had to do that project in 8 weeks. I think the average kind of timeline on a rebrand is around about a year or 18 months. And, slightly different scale.
Slightly quicker.
Yeah, well, but slightly different scale. I think, if you're a huge multinational organization, there's far more moving parts and far more intricacies, even from a legal perspective, that you need to consider. But it can absolutely be done. And you just have to do so with thorough planning and buy-in from the team and communication and acting with speed and making critical decisions and moving forwards.
And you touched on sort of in-house and outsourcing certain elements as part of the project plan, and I appreciate it's completely different for every business depending on what resource you have in-house. But when you're having to do things quickly, like, is it better to keep everything in-house because you've got control if you've got the team to do that, or are you better off outsourcing more elements to it so there's more people involved? Like, what's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, great question. I think I would always recommend hiring a specialist agency because I think it will largely impact the speed in which you can execute and the overall quality of the look and feel of the brand. Because if it's what they do day in, day out, they're going to have far more experience than most in-house teams. And the way that you can kind of divide and conquer a project like that would be to task an agency with key branding exercises, whether it's actually coming up with a brand or not, or whether it's just rebranding, providing them with a thorough brief and getting them to work on the brand guidelines, the web and digital assets, a number of core branding assets like proposal templates, social media templates, company PowerPoints, letterheads. Try and outsource as much of that stuff as you can. And then as a marketing team, really focus on the internal stuff. So, what are the operational implications? How do we need to communicate this internally? How do we need to communicate it with all of our customers?
Is that something you tend to phase as well, or do you do it all at once, or would you usually communicate internally and then take it out to the wider world?
Yeah, so we'd usually, and what I've done in the past is, communicate it internally, not at the outset when the decision has been made at the board level, but as once you've got a plan and you know what all of the moving parts are, and you've got a timeline, and you might even want to wait until you've got something to show the team and get them excited internally, but most certainly to tell them before. And what's really important with that, and what we've done in the past, is having like staff FAQ sheets. So when it does come to a point in time when they're communicating with customers or partners or any third parties, everybody's aligned, they're singing from the same hymn sheet, and they've got exactly the same message, which I think is a really important point.
I think that's a really good insight, actually, because it's not something that when you've created the brand or the rebrand within the marketing team, once it's out there, it's out of your control to a certain element. You can control a lot of how it's out there, but how it's perceived. And I guess if they're speaking with account managers or people, customer service or whoever within the business, that they're not up to speed with what the brand is, that like they're essentially representing and answering, and it can get massively diluted, I imagine. So I think that's a really good thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, they're on the front line. I mean, what I would recommend in terms of customer and partner and third party communication would be to have a kind of stage strategy. So, you have this team briefing and issue FAQ sheets. So when it comes to the rebrand day, they can talk effectively around it. But for your top 50 customers, your top 50 partners or third parties or whomever, I would absolutely recommend doing those face-to-face where possible, or in a meeting type format, rather than them receiving an email or seeing something on social media. Firstly, it makes them feel important, but I think if they're, within your kind of top list of customers, you owe it to them to kind of give them prior notice for things like that, because it can just have broader implications. You might have to change billing procedures internally as a customer if your entity name changes. And there are a number of things that you would have to consider, but it also gives you a unique opportunity to actually get FaceTime with customers that you may not do so on such a regular basis, and reinvigorate those relationships and spark new conversations and create new opportunities. And you could do things like creating rebrand packs and go and visit your top 25, top 50 customers and go and give them all a pack and get them excited about the rebrand and make them feel included as part of the process as well.
Brilliant. No, yeah, I love that. And I think as you mentioned, to get it done in that such a finite space of time, it is the planning side, communicating it sort of effectively, internally and externally. Managing your sort of in-house resource, but finding a suitable agency that kind of specialise in that, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, outside of that, there are some other kind of critical things I think, that are really important and that have really helped me. When you start a project like this, finding a North Star, I think, can be really helpful. If you look at your market and you look at your space and, you look at who may have the majority of market share, or it might just be somebody that you are really fond of and you think their messaging and their positioning is really in line with what your audience is going to resonate with the most. Finding a North Star can be really helpful, whether it's their look and feel, whether it's how they structure their web copy or their social media strategy, or a number of different things. And moreover, if you're using an agency to help you execute on a rebrand, it can kind of give them some insight as to the look and feel and the style that you're wanting to achieve, and can help speed up the process.
Across different companies then, dependent on whether you're a large corporate, a small to medium enterprise, anywhere in between, like there's obviously budget is a factor, like,
yep.
And how big of a factor, well, it is a big factor, but if we just touch a little bit on like what marketing managers and marketing directors need to be thinking about and what they can be doing from a budget perspective.
Yeah, I mean, typically budgets aren't assigned to this at the outset. There may be, and if there is, great, because it's a number that you can kind of work backwards from. In the past, the way that I've approached this is, before you decide, what you want to spend your money on, which agencies you want to work with, what aspects of the rebrand you'd like to execute on, pull together a budget with everything in there that you would love to do as part of the exercise, whether it's signage, apparel, merchandise, PR campaigns, SEO, web, video, all of these kind of core aspects to executing a rebrand, and go out to market, get some competitive costs and prices on all of these different line items and pull them into a budget, and then sit down with your leadership team and say, right, this is what I would love to do, or we would love to do, and this is everything in here that I think will make the most impactful rebrand. But if we can't make this budget work, let's prioritize on some of the line items in here and maybe cut out some of the things that you think aren't going to add the most return on investment, or things that you think aren't as essential, or things that might have a significant impact, or potentially things that we could do maybe down the line, and work backwards that way. And that's always proven an effective way to budget a rebrand project for me. Okay,
so we're at the day of the brand or rebrand going live.
Mm-hmm.
How the hell does that feel when it's been your baby over the 12, 18 months, or in your case, much shorter, dependent on circumstance? Like,
yeah,
I can imagine it's pretty nerve-wracking, but just talk me through a little bit how that feels from a marketing perspective, and then share any kind of insights to, what that feels like and how you can make it feel better.
Well, launch days can actually be quite stressful if you think about it. There's a number of things that somewhat have to be executed at the same time. Web domain switchovers. You can't just flick a switch and it happens. There's all sorts of web crawling that has to take place, and it can take 24, 48 hours. Switching over email domains is the same. And, another thing that I learned with that is you have to actually build up domain authority to be able to use emails with high volume. So what I mean by that is, if you've got a whole team of people that need to use a new email address and email outwards, it can actually be blocked and go into spam filters if the domain isn't credible and it doesn't have a lot of authority. So actually putting a domain in place a month before you have a rebrand and having a few people send emails and having a web instance up can actually be quite helpful in terms of the swiftness of execution of that kind of switchover. But, going back to your question, there's a lot of things that have to go at the same time.
So I guess you're that busy on the day
that
you probably don't feel the stress as such, because you're just here, there and everywhere doing it.
Yeah. You got to try and time everything, as closely together as you can. There's no way you can press go on everything at the same time. Social media content going live, signage arriving, domain switchovers, proposals and quote templates being updated in systems, you know, internal system rebrands like HR portals, SharePoint sites. There are so many things to consider, but all you can do really is try and align the best that you can. And what I've done in the past is execute the internal stuff in the week lead up to, because it doesn't really matter internally if people see the changes because they know that it's coming, and kind of get that out of the way, and on the day focus on the external stuff. And yeah, it's a great feeling when you kind of go live with something and seeing people's reactions. It's really, yeah, it's definitely a weight
pride as well, a bit of pride
for sure. Most certainly had that feeling in the past, and definitely a weight off your shoulders. And it's really nice to see, you know, the market reaction and how people react to the brand and the change and the update. And, you know, had some really positive feedback from some rebrands in the past, which has been, you know, makes it all worth it. I would definitely say.
Yeah, no, I bet that's particularly when you've worked so hard towards something. I think to get that feedback from clients and you know, colleagues as well must feel really good. So I think, no, there's been some really, really good insights in there, James. I really appreciate you sharing that with us and our audience. And I guess if our audience could take one key takeaway or one piece of advice from anything that we've kind of spoken about there, or maybe something slightly different that we haven't touched on, what would be the one thing that you would want to say to James Blackburn 5 years ago before I'd done any rebrands? What would be the one thing and one piece of advice that you'd pass on?
Great question. Enjoy it. It's not something you get to do every single day. And whilst it might be stressful, it can be quite career defining. So enjoy the process. Definitely don't cut any corners, because any project like this has got to last any business for the long term. So it's got to have longevity. So it's a big investment, and you've got to make sure that it counts and you don't cut any corners. But moreover, I think when you're making these decisions and you're trying to pull everybody's thoughts and ideas into this one concept, it's really easy to get caught up into what you like, because it is subjective and it's not objective. And I've been, you know, victim of that in the past. I've got a very distinct look and feel and style and kind of signature to, you know, brands that I've built, I guess, in the past. But what is the most important fundamentally on an exercise like this is what your audience is going to resonate with the most. It's what we talked about at the outset. What is a brand? And it's a personality, and it influences an organization's entire strategy through to pricing, messaging, customer experience. So ultimately, the end result has got to be what is going to resonate with the audience the most and what they're going to appeal to the most. So don't get caught up in what you like, and focus on what your audience is going to react to and relate to the most.
Yeah, I love that, James. And I think that's a really strong ending to the podcast. So I think we'll leave it there. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you've enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it's been great. Been a great experience, and it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And thanks to you for listening and or watching to this week's episode of The Cutting Room. Hope you've enjoyed it. I thought there were some really good insights in there. So if you have, please don't forget to like it, share it, follow it, tell all your friends and family about it. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again in The Cutting Room.